So I was in the shower this morning, Mike,
Good start. All right.
meditating upon Batman as I'm wont to do.
Okay.
But that got me thinking about the funny voice deliveries in Nolan's Batman films, and ultimately that gets you to Bane, right? And then I was thinking to myself, Nolan is so committed to the hyper realism in those Batman movies that he acknowledges that if you have a dude walking around with a giant mask on his face, you're not going to be able to understand half of what he says. And he just committed to it.
And just yeah.
He's like, forget the audience. Who cares? I'm going for realism.
So yeah, at some point, that's the most unbelievable thing about any of the Batman movies is nobody ever like either when Bane says something or Batman says something, nobody ever responds with, "Huh?" He never has to repeat himself.
Being in the shower has nothing to do with this,
Thank
by
you
the way.
for
I could
starting
have
off with
told
that
this
though. It
entire
just it
anecdote.
really gets
I
me.
just felt that was a better
No,
hook.
I'm more invested, and I'm sure all of our listeners are too.
Welcome to the Voyage Podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Voyage Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about, Jacob and I will not be talking about Batman, believe it or not, as much as, you might want, well, there might be a little bit of Batman going on, but we're going to be going
This is
into,
another episode about Lord of the
no,
Rings all the way
please
down.
don't. So this is going to be about
By popular request.
the different tools or widgets or devices, you could almost say comic book sacramentals that are taken on the
Ooh.
spiritual journey, but then how do they correspond to mythology and of course, like we've already mentioned, in theology, we have this tradition of sacramentals as sort of like tools for the journey, right?
I have a suspicion that Mike wanted to have this conversation because recently we had a little friendly East-West debate about the
Oh,
nature of sacraments.
yeah,
And I think he just wants to debate this over the internet in front
absolutely
of
not.
our millions
So
of
you're as usual, Jacob, you're half right.
viewers,
As
listeners.
usual, you're half right.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Okay.
that was somewhat inspired.
I am a half-wit,
Yeah.
so that would follow.
Um, so in one sense, yeah, we have had this conversation before of sort of like the distinction between sacraments and sacramentals, which as you would admit, I mean, this isn't like a concession by any means, that it's a much sharper distinction
Never.
in the West than it is in the East, right?
Yeah,
And
no, I don't even think I I I don't really actually have a problem with the idea of sacramentals as such. I don't like what you're pointing out is I don't really think there's much disagreement there. But then again, I guess I think we'll talk more about it this
maybe.
episode, frankly,
Um,
and kind of
I don't want it to necessarily get too in the weeds in terms of that, but it also
right.
is supposed to,
Oh, well, you know what? I'm half of this relationship too, Mike.
yeah.
And gall darn it, you know,
Only so
I'm
many
I'm putting
concessions can be made for you. Okay, only so many. I mean,
okay.
I already have to.
Well, I'm gonna try that on my wife
I
next
already have to
time.
look at
The next
you
time
across the screen, whereas nobody else does. So that's the first sacrifice that I'm making for this conversation. But
the next time my wife tries to put her foot down with me, I'm gonna say, there are only so many concessions I can make with you,
yeah,
and
please,
just shut down the
please do, please
conversation.
do. No, what you got to do is
And then I'm gonna say,
un-
my friend Mike, he
see.
gave me that
Unfortunately
trick.
for you, because you were married before you were Orthodox, right? Yeah,
Yeah, that's
so
true.
unfortunately, you don't have your crown from the ceremony that you can
I
put on to
know.
exert that authority. But
I'm gonna go buy my own crown,
yeah,
and it's gonna be way cooler than the crown I would have got. It'll have filigree on it.
oh, please, any excuse to keep using that word. So we wanted to talk about like we kind of mentioned, yeah, we'll go into the sacramentals, the sacramental tradition, to go back into what inspired this. So yeah, we've had this conversation before. It doesn't just have to be like an Eastern Western thing. I mean, it's very much a, ancient historic, little o Orthodox, little c Catholic Christianity that has this
Mm.
tradition of you could almost say like spiritual tools if you want to like, I don't know, be, I guess, a little bit
No,
yeah.
yeah, like, it's kinda it feels a little, reductive or something like that, right? But at the end of the day, I think that's probably kind of accurate to Yeah,
And
that's a fun way of putting
well,
it.
and you'll never believe this,
Fun
Jacob,
for the
but
kids.
Voyage Comics is actually producing a very much Sacramental inspired character. The Metal Knight.
Ooh.
Metal Knight is going to have incorporate a lot of this sacramental tradition from the Catholic
Does he have
tradition.
a whole room full of medals from all of the
It's it's
competitions and spelling
so
bees and
it's just one
triathlons?
medal in particular. Thank you for undermining your corporate overlords one more time. It's the miraculous medal actually, which is one example of a sacramental in the especially the Western kind of Catholic tradition. And we can go a little bit into the background of that. I mean,
I
it's
don't even know if I know what a miraculous medal is.
well, okay. Well, why don't we then? Why don't we just
Miraculous. And now we're saying miraculous. We're not saying metal. We're saying medal.
yes.
Oh, well, miraculous metal,
Yeah,
frankly,
well, I
sounds
mean, it's a
cooler.
little bit of
So,
both
I
and
mean,
almost actually. So,
oh,
the miraculous medal, if and it's worth a Google actually, Jacob. But so it
okay.
actually comes from
Well,
France.
are you trying to get me to prepare again, Mike?
Yeah, something like that. Um, so it's a it comes from Saint Catherine Labouré, and so she was living in France in the I believe the 1800s, and she had this vision of Mary. And part of the vision, part of the message of Mary. Oh, yeah, did I say 1800s? Yeah, it's 1800s. And
Okay.
part of the message was that she would have this medal created and it would have a special prayer on it. It's, "Oh Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee." Now,
Hmm.
one piece of significance is that this is prior to the actual official pronouncement of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, which I think was in 1854. So it came a little bit before
Okay.
that. But like I said, you have this specific prayer that's associated with this medal, and there's an image of Mary, and on that image, it's like her. It's kind of the typical like she's standing on the clouds, sort of like heavenly depiction. But from her hands, you
Hmm.
have these. It looks like rays of light, and that was part of the vision that
Hmm.
Saint Catherine Labouré had of her. But it was the idea that just like again Catholic and Orthodox, we see that she is the one who is full of grace, as the Gospel of Luke tells us, but that she becomes the means by which all of those graces are distributed to the church throughout the world. And so that's what the rays of light. She doesn't produce them, right? It's still God's grace, but it's working through
Hmm.
her, and then you could, I guess, for lack of a better term, distributes them, accordingly. And so what now originally it was not called the miraculous medal. Mary didn't tell her take this miraculous medal, blah, 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 blah. It's almost like a nickname that was given to it because she had her stamp this medal and distribute them. And there were so many miracles associated with the medal that it took
Hmm.
on the name, the miraculous medal. And so, like I said, you'll find them in pretty much every like Catholic gift shop, you can find them and buy them online and buy them by the hundreds and give them away. Um, like I said, it's just,
You too can have your own miracle working medallion.
well, see, and
Just go to
that kind of speaks to
catholicbookstore.com.
so that even speaks to one of the I guess what would you say, like, not arguments against it, but one of the oftentimes objections to it is that it almost is treated like a magic talisman, right?
Hmm.
And we are sort of jokingly not conflating the two, but almost making an analogy in our conversation today when we're talking about, what are these different either talismans or tools or devices in books, movies, video games, whatever. And so that's where we'll have to kind of point out where the analogy
Yeah,
falls short.
I think that this episode is going to veer dangerously close into the territory of the magic episode I want to have sometime.
Okay.
I mean, and honestly, the overlap might be so prevalent that maybe I've just stumbled onto the magic episode I've been wanting to
Well,
eventually get around
it
to.
kind of goes
Who
into,
knows?
and we've alluded to this conversation, which is just the whole like sacramental view of reality or incarnational view of reality. And this is just another
Mhm.
product of that in the same way that magic is supposed to kind of be too, right? In the way that magic
Yeah,
is sort
sure,
of
sure.
used. So, again, yeah, there's going to be a lot of convergence, but it won't
Can
necessarily
I
be the
just
same conversation.
I am just a little disappointed that this um miraculous metal is not some kind of Catholic sorcerer's stone. I mean, I was really hoping that we were about to
No, you're thinking of the
discover,
Holy
kind
Grail,
of.
Jacob. Sorry. That's
Oh,
see,
of
you forgot
course,
about
of
the Holy
course.
Grail. That's the
I did.
Sorcerer's Stone or
Man,
Philosopher's
that's
Stone
gonna
as
have
it's
to come back
originally.
into this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which
Or maybe like a Midas touch type thing, you can just kinda get all the money because that's what we
I
Christians are
yeah,
about.
I don't have a joke for that one. Actually, it's a so it's funny you bring that up because so this idea that, the church is too obsessed with money, uh the best example that illustrates this. So I'm going through with my students, my high school students, at the end of the year we always go through Dante's Divine Comedy. And we're in the
Okay.
circle of hell dedicated to greed and prodigality. And so who does Dante
You wait till the end of the year to go through Dante's Divine Comedy?
Yeah, we got to close out the year with something
What,
good to keep it, because that's the one thing they'll remember.
just on a lark, huh?
That's the one thing. It's
I mean, so how much do you manage to fit in
Oh, I mean, we
at the end of the
we
year?
jump through. I mean, we have to skip around a little bit, but we do. I mean,
Yeah, there's not much in that book anyway,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I could see
just the
it.
good
Yeah.
parts, the highlight. But in
Yeah.
the circle of greed, he actually does ask Virgil about, hey, what are all these monks and priests doing over here? And it's like, yeah, well, they have a special thing with greed, so so it's it's been around.
Yeah.
People want to like own the church nowadays and say, oh, they're obsessed. It's like, yeah, it's people have been
Mhm.
talking about that for a while.
You just
Read
what an
Dante.
original, witty, yeah, accusation you got there.
So,
Um, well, so, before this episode, you said, "Hey, we're gonna talk about, things in fiction, just like, helpful tools and things like that. So just think about what your favorite might be." And that's a fun question for one, but it's also a big question. And it's like,
I
oh
was struggling
man,
actually when I was thinking of it myself
yeah,
too.
it's
So,
like, oh, it's one of those things where like you're asked this question. It's like there's just so much to think through
and it
that
says
you
something
can't think
about
of
you. You're
anything.
revealing something about yourself when depending on what you say. So,
Yeah, if I cared about what people thought about me, I mean, I'm not respectable like you, Mike.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so it was almost like, wow, I don't know. And so my first inclinations were, I don't know, I just kept going back to swords
Yeah.
because I'm unimaginative and I'm kind of going through some like a King
You've
Arthur
got like
phase.
you've got
And
kind of a
so,
phallic obsession too. So, yeah.
aha, yes,
Sometimes a
that's why I
sword
am
is
very
just a sword.
masculine. That's sometimes, not always, not
Sometimes.
often, but sometimes.
Yeah.
Did you know? All right, since we went there, King Arthur's Excalibur was actually only half of the gimmick that he had. The other half was the sheath
Okay.
that would actually, yeah. So I don't know if you knew this or not, but
No.
the sword would basically kill anything, but the sheath would protect King Arthur so he could not be wounded.
Hmm.
And so there is actually some imagery there where like you need both the sword and the sheath
Yeah.
for things to be ultimate. But anyway, um and then he loses the sheath. And
Mm.
ultimately that's kind of contributes to his downfall in the end.
It's kind of
But
a feminist interpretation. Is that what you're saying?
it well, you know me, Mike. Classic feminist right
Yeah.
here. But hey, you know what?
So,
You're right when you
are
say
you?
that though.
No, yeah,
That's very it's
absolutely.
we have there's the you need both the masculine and the feminine.
So, are you going with
So
Excalibur or are you going with the sheath? Sorry.
no, that would be way too basic. Yeah. In fact, I actually was like, dude, I can't just not think of an answer that's cool. So I went and I just Googled like coolest sci-fi gadget
Boo.
or
So you
coolest.
went
No,
with
well,
the
I'm glad I did because frankly, I want to read some of these because I would have never thought of half of these,
okay.
but I'm familiar with all of them, of course, and that's why sometimes you got to prepare, Mike.
I know.
Sometimes you have to do a little
I'll keep
research,
that in
okay?
mind. Yeah, I'll keep that in
You
mind going
might you
forward.
might think about it next time. But okay, so how about the proton packs from Ghostbusters?
Okay.
That was a pretty good one.
S-
I wouldn't have thought of that one, but for one, they look super cool
Okay.
and they make cool noises. And then when they shoot things, it looks awesome. And you use them to capture ghosts.
And perfect for cosplay. You just use one of those handheld vacuums or one of the little vacuums with the tube on it, and
No,
you've
yeah,
got a
super
built-in
easy.
Halloween costume.
Super easy to imitate for your Halloween costume. Or how about Spider-Man's web shooters?
Mhm. Well, and
That's
actually,
that would actually be pretty slick.
so and there again, you've got something like you were talking about the significance of the sword and the sheath with Excalibur. With the, what was the proton pack? It was for capturing things, keeping them contained, right? And then with
Mhm.
the web shooter,
Sure,
what's
sure.
the primary, I mean, he uses it sort of as a like a containment tool, but also as transportation, right? That's his, way to move about freely,
True,
much more
true.
freely through the city than, anything else. I was thinking the
Uh,
is it the oh my now I'm blanking on the name. Oh my gosh, from Doctor Who. Is it Screwdriver? No.
well, that's the only thing more basic. That's the only answer you could have given more basic than something like Excalibur.
Oh, okay.
Like,
Because the thing that can
because
just do
yes, of course,
anything.
I thought.
The thing that
Well,
can
yeah, yeah. The sonic screwdriver is hilariously just whatever the plot needs it to
yeah.
be.
It's
The tool necessary to get out of whatever conundrum the doctor happens to be in. Uh, that whole thing got me thinking about again that old canard. How funny it is that science fiction is just magic,
yeah.
right? Where everything is just so but it's not considered magic because it's quote unquote there's some kind of technology behind it. We just don't know what it is because we couldn't explain it to you anyway because it's like beyond your comprehension. But trust us, it's not magic. It's actually just science.
Yeah.
It just looks magical.
All
But
but then
then
science
when you
itself
get
is just
into the
magic, so
history,
yeah.
no, yeah,
Yeah.
when you get into the history of like what science, like what magic meant for people throughout history,
Mhm.
it's just technology.
Yeah.
It is just what we call science today. And science, of course, Isaac Newton was an alchemist. I mean,
Yeah.
like most of his writings were spiritual or theological. He just happened to be also he included natural sciences in metaphysical sciences,
Mhm.
right? I mean, there's physical sciences and metaphysical sciences, but it's all just you know, parts of the onion, let's say. Um layers.
Well,
But, anyway.
and yeah, even like, I mean, if you keep kind of peeling back the layers or scratching the surface too, is like, science just from scientia for knowledge, and magic was always about this like secret knowledge or hidden knowledge. And so it's all kind of converging to the same point, so to speak. Yeah, I think it's funny
Well,
how
there's
like people will want to scratch the surface of magic and say, well, look at the science underneath. But if you keep scratching the science surface, you'll eventually get to something that everybody calls magic anyway. So
well, that is true. But, like, so all the different words that we have in, like, ancient Greek, for example, that can be, translated into English as some kind of magic or divinization or something like that. They're all words like techne.
mhm.
Techne is actually where, so these are words for, like, magical practices. So if an ancient Greek person said, "Oh, techne," he was referring to something that we would quote unquote call magical. But obviously that's where we get the word technology from. Or another classic Greek word for something that would have been considered quote unquote magical was pharma, which is where we get pharmaceuticals from,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so this is the idea that there's something called magic, and what people are talking about is like Harry Potter magic, right?
Mhm.
This is why it's I love the Harry Potter books, and don't get me wrong, within the context of the worlds, Harry Potter magic is fun. It is
But it's
fun,
basically
but
techne.
it's the but it's also silly.
Yeah.
It's like silly magic,
Like washing your
right?
dishes. Like, oh,
So
imagine something that washed your dishes for you. Well, actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
or to use another, or like Sword in the Stone, like Merlin and Sword of the Stone, the Disney classic.
Yeah.
Bippity boppity bippity boop, like, and all the dishes are washing themselves in the air and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, I this probably isn't supposed to be a magic episode, but it's gonna get into it all. And I just want to it's one of my little chagrins is this idea that we are in a world full of magic. I am talking to you through a magical device right now. But because we distinguish technology from magic,
'Cause this
which is
has
this
this
very
has
kind of
wires in it,
modern.
so that's not magic.
Yeah, it's wires, so it's like, yeah, but the magic they used back in medieval times wasn't just like imagination.
So like,
they use
so you
stuff. They
gotta
were using
create a like
stuff to do
fantasy
stuff.
book or fantasy story, but the wands, instead of having like unicorn hair in the wand, it's like a copper wire, you know? And so
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
ooh, the magical
Exactly.
copper wire that, communicates
And
electricity. Yeah.
honestly, and that's my goal for everyone listening today, is to think of your magical copper wire as magical copper wire
Hmm.
because it's magical. But and that's really going to bring us into this what this conversation is really supposed to be about.
Hmm.
But I will say, I mean, and this will be somewhat lame, but Green Lantern's ring is still probably the coolest device
Well, that's basically the sonic
because it can
screwdriver, though.
literally.
I mean,
But at least like, I mean, I don't know if I can actually retort against that.
because
But the sonic screwdriver
just
isn't
a
like kind
hack.
of like yeah, the sonic screwdriver is a cheesy way out. The power rings in
Oh,
Green
and we've
Lantern
had
were
this
designed to manifest your
and we've had this
willpower. Like, so you
conversation.
can't.
So, in terms of the
Yeah.
significance of it being a ring, it being connected to your will. So, no, I'm not gonna denigrate the Green Lantern ring, but functionally, it is the sonic screwdriver. It's the Deus ex
Whatever,
machina,
Mike.
sort of like do whatever
Whatever.
the plot.
Yeah, I mean, kinda. I don't know.
You hate being
Um,
confronted with that, but
I,
we just haven't talked enough about Doctor Who yet on this podcast. Like we haven't
we
done
haven't.
any Doctor Who related stuff, which I am trying to save it for when we talk about the nature of time. So I thought that would be more
Oh,
fitting.
okay.
But yeah, no, sonic screwdriver, which I wasn't even just proposing as my favorite. It was just like, well, that's definitely one that needs to be talked about.
That pops
Yeah.
up for sure. Yeah,
Um,
that it's almost the one I think that might have been the very first thing I thought of because it's almost archetypal, like, you know, crazy sci-fi gadget. And it's like a sonic screwdriver,
and
you know.
it has
Or
to like
lightsabers. Lightsabers are sick, but that's kind of just like a
that's
sci-fi
just a
sword.
sword, yeah. And like even not
Yeah.
that the proton pack is like just a gun, but the other thing I was thinking is like, well, it can't just be another gun. Like, oh, it's a laser gun or it's a this type of gun or that type of,
Mhm.
And again, sonic screwdriver, it's not just a sword or just a gun. It's if anything, it's more about access with that, right?
The problem with
It's
sonic
access.
screwdriver, you know what the difference between the power ring and the sonic screwdriver is, Mike? Is the power ring is defined.
Mm.
It is a thing that does what it is defined as doing. The sonic screwdriver is literally just whatever it needs to be. It is like Batman's utility belt.
Well, there's another
It
example.
is
You
it
couldn't
is.
help
No,
but
it
bring
is.
in
And
Batman.
there's anything that needs to be in Batman's utility belt is in Batman's utility belt. Which, oh, I'm so glad I brought that up because earlier today I did think of what my actual official answer was meant to
Shark
be.
repellent.
Shark repellent.
That really was what
Shark
it
repellents.
that
Yeah,
was what it was?
absolutely.
Oh
That's
my
I was like, I am 100% gonna say shark repellent.
and I
And if
stole your
you don't
thunder.
understand, no, because you knew it too.
Uh-huh.
Deep down inside, you knew shark repellent was the answer.
And
And
keep in mind that we
it's
both
so
live in a
effective.
landlocked state. we we both
It is so effective, Mike, that I happen to have my own container, and I never ever run into sharks.
wow, it's
So
working. It works
if you
almost too
want to
well.
buy some, I will sell some to you.
Uh, yeah, no, that's
Yay.
I can remember my grandparents had the old Adam West Batman with
Yeah,
and I
Batman
saw
66
that
Batman movie.
and I feel like I've seen that scene. Like it's just seared into my brain. Like I
Oh, dude, I used to watch that all the
spraying the
time
shark
when
or
I was a little
whatever.
kid. Spraying the shark, and he's all rubbery looking. Like there's the
Well,
shark gets caught between his leg and like the ladder on the helicopter,
yeah.
but the shark is bent because it's just like a rubber
Well,
shark.
and what's funny is,
Uh,
they kind of struggle even as he sprays it. It doesn't like release right away. So what's
yeah.
funny is if you watch the new Lego Batman movie, and I say new, it's like probably 4 or 5 years now, but the one with like Lego Batman.
Oh yeah, hilarious.
So
Fantastic.
there's a throwaway line where Robin sees that in the Batcave, and Batman is like, "Yeah, that doesn't work very well." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's a callback not just to that scene, but the
It's because that
specific."
movie's awesome.
Yeah.
That movie is so
We
good
actually
if you are just in love with
we just
Batman.
rewatched it with my kids have all seen it multiple times, but we just rewatched it over the weekend because yeah, it's just
I actually need to
it's
rewatch that movie
it's
now.
for anyone who has loved any of the Batmans. the iterations of
That
Batman.
has something for
Yeah.
you, for sure.
Um,
Um, did you remember the main contraption, like the villainous contraption in that movie? It was like the dehydron
yep.
dehydrogenator or
Yeah.
something like that,
Uh-huh.
and it turns people
Like
into
little like
to
vials of
dust.
dust, yeah, that they collected.
Yes, and they get swept up with a dustpan. Oh man, that movie's awesome.
So another good one, and it's actually veers more into the Christian tradition. If you think of the gifts from Father Christmas in the Narnia, in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe,
Oh,
you have some
that's
really
nice.
good,
Yep.
like, take, it's dangerous up ahead. Take this with you kind of mind. Like, that's literally what that scene is for. And it kind of goes
Mhm.
back into, not to take too much of a left turn too, but like when we had our conversation on Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, you have the
Sure.
wise elder that sort of like prepares you. And for the kids, it really is Father Christmas. And that scene, like, I think it was Tolkien who actually complained about Father Christmas showing up and doing that. But it kind of fits in, not that it had to be Father Christmas, but it had to be some wise figure to show up at that point in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for the kids, right?
Well, and also I think that, and you can I love imagining, Tolkien and, like, the Inklings, Lewis hanging out in that pub they used to always hang out
Yeah.
at, listening to Lewis's latest chapter and just cringing, just like, just his eyes rolling out of his head. Tolkien must have
And
hated
everyone
because I know
knowing
he notoriously did, but, like, I can only imagine how much that must have been nails on a
and
chalkboard.
them all knowing that it's gonna be so much more successful than any of their stuff. That had to have been I know that they were all professors and writers and above all that, but you still had to it still had to make it
You know,
so much worse.
there was something of a falling out between Tolkien and Lewis, right? I don't think that, like, there wasn't like a dramatic falling out. It wasn't like they hated each other or whatever, but they just weren't as close in their last years as they were at an earlier phase in their lifetimes, from what I understand.
Yeah, I know that has been
It,
talked about a lot. I've gone into because there are a couple of books written specifically on the friendship between them, and I mean, I do remember kind of diving into that. I don't remember it.
is that true? That's what I
Yeah,
hear, but I've
well,
never
that's where
investigated
I think
it.
it's
So
one of
I
those
mean,
things where it's like everybody knows that, but the more like I've heard different theories. I've actually heard one of the theories was that Tolkien or that Lewis Tolkien was disappointed that Lewis never fully converted to Catholicism, that he just kind of
yeah,
like stayed
yeah,
put like for Catholicism light by being Anglican. Um
right. That's what I've heard too.
and
Now and but I and so yes, I have heard
okay.
that, but I suspect that Tolkien was just never got over the Narnia. I think that everything we talked about is the secret reason why Tolkien cooled
He's like
towards
it
Lewis,
it's one
is he
thing
just couldn't stand him using fawns and Father Christmas
it's
and
one thing to betray the
whatever.
Pope. It's another thing to betray what? Like
Yeah, the a proper mythic structure
yeah.
for your,
It's another thing to betray Beowulf. Like
fables. Yes, exactly. I suspect. I have strong suspicions. But Lewis, he wanted a mythic figure like Father
mhm.
Christmas, Santa Claus. He wanted the ultimate gift giver, right? And so that it's the Father Christmas thing, and I get it. Most people, when that, myself included, when Santa Claus shows up in the middle of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's like a needle scratch. It's like what? Like why? What? It is this you don't even know what to make of it, right? But
Yeah.
it's actually the perfect
And
key to understanding Lewis's idea that he's creating the ultimate mythical reality.
there was already sort of like Christmassy sort of imagery. I mean, for one, we've already talked about the inherent connections between uh oh my gosh, Bethlehem and Bethlehem and Jerusalem, between the Christmas and the Easter stories, and we very much
Mm,
get the Easter part of it with the death and resurrection of Aslan later. But do you remember how one of the big refrains of the creatures in Narnia, while the White Witch is in control, is that it's
always
always winter but
winter,
never Christmas. And
but
so
never
that
Christmas.
I've always felt like even when I can even remember as a young kid first experiencing the story, and like it always kind of felt right to me. But again, I didn't have the background of, well, is this a proper myth? And is this like I didn't have all that sort of
Mhm.
baggage at the time. Um, so it's still, and maybe I'm over sentimentalizing it, but it's always sort of, and I don't even have a sentimental connection to like Santa and the Santa Claus thing. Like we've done
Hmm.
that with our kids, but I've never been one. I'm just like, you know what? I don't want to deal with Santa. Let's just like, put the presents out. They know it's from like, I don't want to, that whole sort of thing.
I've never. People are going to hang me up from my whatever nethers, but like we didn't. I always thought it was the weirdest thing to like basically lie to your kids and say that there is a figure that's going to give you presents.
See,
I literally had a hard time reconciling it to myself as a
and
Christian. It's like, how is this not a lie?
and
Like, how is this not
and I'm not even
why is this
And I'm not
appropriate?
even trying to
You
get into the
know?
whole, like, is it justified or is it good or bad? Like, it's just more like in reading it in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, it actually kind of felt natural to me. But like I said, I'm not coming in with the same,
Oh, no, I have no
background that
problem with
Tolkien.
Santa Claus as a story, right? As a fable, as a symbol for Christmas.
No, but
Obviously,
you were saying
but
how
like when it came to
Tolkien didn't like that Lewis incorporated. Like, that's what I'm saying. I was
oh,
just going
yeah,
back
yeah,
to our
yeah, for sure.
conversation about trying to get us on track, Jacob. You wanna
Yeah,
get
I
into
know.
the culture war of Santa or no Santa.
I've
So
been very effective at derailing this
yeah,
conversation this
you're
episode.
you wanted to
More
demonize
more effective than
You wanted
usual.
to demonize everybody about celebrating Santa Claus and having Santa bring presents. I just want us to talk about
I do.
sacramentals for goodness sake. So what's
Let's do
interesting
it.
and go back to one of the first things I said when we were talking about each of our like favorites was that it says something personal. And I think that's what the gift when Father Christmas gives it to Peter, Edmund, Susan, and Lucy, especially Susan's and Lucy. Those are the ones that stand out more to me because obviously Peter's it's the sword, right? And
Mhm.
so, like you
Yeah,
said,
he's got the cool one.
a sword is a sword until it's not a sword. But
Mhm.
Susan's was the horn, and how when you
Yep.
call for it, help will come. And so there's this magical element of yeah, it is just a physical horn, and you
The
can
Horn of
and
Gondor. Oh,
okay,
I'm
and you
sorry,
can
wrong
also bring up
horn.
Boromir too, right? But
Yeah,
how calling for aid, which I mean, what is that? But just a prayer, right? It's sort of and actually it kind of ties into the sacramental idea that we're talking about, where it's like sacramentals are supposed to be an aid for prayer first and foremost. It draws you closer to the grace in the sacraments themselves. It draws you closer to your relationship with God, which was Susan's horn. And then
sure.
Lucy, what was hers? It's the vial for healing. And so
Didn't yeah, I guess that's true. Okay, for some reason I thought one of them got like a bow and arrow, but
that did she? I mean, she
maybe
does have a bow.
maybe
Susan has a bow and arrow in the. Yeah, and maybe she. I mean,
I might just be, I don't know, maybe I'm just getting that from the movie or something like that.
it is. I mean, she
What
gets
was
the horn though,
Edmund's?
right? That's now I'm second guessing it.
Some someone gets a horn. Yes, right? I believe that's true.
Okay, this is great. This is awesome. You had to bring up a bow and arrow. Yes.
Okay, well, I don't know. You're the one that prepares for these
She
things, Mike. I
she
mean,
okay.
if
I didn't think I'd have to go into the Wikipedia page. Given to her by Father Christmas. So yeah, Susan's horn is the it is
okay,
her
very
gift.
good.
But what does it say again about each of them is like she was, and you kind of get this feeling in the book and in the movie, the Narnia movie, that she is very much a like kind of a mother figure to the other three, even though Peter's the
Yeah,
oldest,
for
right?
sure.
She's sort of the mother, like,
She's almost like the Wendy to like the Lost Boys
yeah.
almost thing.
And so she very much has that like, bringing the people together or uniting, which is kind of what the horn was meant to do is it's calling for aid, it's uniting the troops, so to speak. Not that it has to be always a, violent or battle sort of image, but that was very much kind of her role. So it said something about her. And then Lucy, of course, was the healer, right? And
Mhm.
so she was the one that, she was so quick to forgive Edmund, even though he had betrayed the group. And so you get that healing element there. She, of course, does the healing after the battle in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But yeah, it very much fit her personality. And
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
you know, it occurs to me that we kind of through no fault of my own, we have kind of glossed over a lot of stuff when it comes to what we're talking about here, right? In the sense that like we should just give a basic definition of sacrament and sacramentals and all that type of thing. And then that way we have that context for when we're discussing these usages in fiction and things like that. Um, a sacrament being something that God performs through material means for the sake of administering grace to the people of his church,
Mhm.
right? Um, and a sacramental, I'll let you take this one.
Well, so yeah,
Go.
a sacramental is just sort of like and like we've kind of talked about it before, is a sort of tool that is supposed to draw one into that deeper relationship or draw one to that source of grace. So whether it's drawing you to a sacrament itself, or just drawing you into deeper prayer, drawing you into deeper relationship with God. So, for example, some of the most popular sacramentals, at least in the Western Catholic tradition, would be like probably like the Rosary is probably the most popular. Okay,
Mm,
so there again,
yep.
it's very much a tool for prayer. It's not a replacement for the prayer. You just having it isn't the same as praying. And you could
Hmm.
technically pray without the sacramental, without the rosary, of course, right? You could even say the exact same prayers. Catholics have even talked about how on a rosary it's broken up into 10, so you could like use your fingers as each of the beads or whatever. So, I mean,
Is that not intentional? I always just assumed that was exactly why it was broken into 10.
so it was so a little bit on the history of the rosary. I mean, this isn't a rosary episode, but basically the structure of the rosary of having it broken up into 5 sets of 10 to make 50, it actually goes back to the original before it was the rosary where you'd say Hail Marys, is it was supposed to be
Mhm.
for the 150 Psalms. And so it was three groups of 50 originally. And
Oh,
so the monks would uh, and this goes back to the Desert Fathers, I believe, but they would have like 5 stones in their pocket, and then they would pray the Psalms 5 at a time, and they'd pass a rock from one pocket to the next pocket and back and forth. And then it eventually became they would tie knots in a cord around their waist like a belt, and you'd tie
mhm,
5 knots, and then you would just 1 through 5. But the reason why it went from all 150 Psalms to just the Hail Mary is because, I mean, people either didn't know all 150 or couldn't memorize all 150. They didn't have access to all 150, but they could say the Hail Mary prayer, which is, of course,
mhm,
taken from the first chapter of Luke when the angel Gabriel visits Mary, but then also when Mary visits Elizabeth. And so they would pray that prayer, and they would do it, they'd still break it up into 5 groups according to each mystery of the rosary. And so that's where, like I said, they kind of the structure in terms of the numbers comes from. Um,
that's very interesting.
yeah, so it started with just rocks, and then like I said, it became the knots in the cord, which you actually see for Franciscans and Dominicans when they're wearing their habit. And sorry, I shouldn't say it's not just those two. Actually, a lot of religious orders, when they wear their habit, you'll see the cord wrapped around their waist, and you'll see knots in the cord, and that's supposed to
Yeah,
be again like their use of or the way it's sort of like to
mhm,
pray a rosary. Some of them actually have rosaries hanging from their belt too. So
mhm, mhm. No, I've always thought rosaries are pretty cool, even though I'm not Catholic. We have a couple of
well, and
them.
you guys have, I mean, the Eastern equivalent. It's kind of seen as
Yeah,
the
we
Eastern
have
equivalent
something
is the
similar.
Jesus prayer.
Yeah,
What would you call
prayer
that? Yeah,
ropes.
just
Yeah,
okay.
they're just called prayer ropes. But yeah, and those actually have like they're always knotted. It's a very cool knot. It's a very complicated knot. And so monks will practice doing these knots on these ropes, and oftentimes it's a means that they can kind of sell it to faithful and make some money for their monastery and things like that. But they're always knotted in segments of like 10 or 30
Mhm.
or something like that. And you can get them in different sizes. So they kind of passingly look like a rosary in the sense that they look like a necklace. They have beads spaced across them, and there's always a cross hanging from them. But some of these things can be hundreds of knots, and so you talk about a prayer rope, and it ceases to look like a necklace because it looks much more like you're
Well,
carrying this massive rope
and
around.
actually, in some, you'll see this more with religious brothers or sisters where they won't do the 50. They'll actually have a rosary where it's 150, so it's much longer,
Mm,
and they'll wrap it
yeah,
around
yeah,
numerous times. But actually, Jacob,
yep.
since you mentioned it, uh, do you remember this is actually sort of how we became friends, is you were wearing the
In the
prayer rope.
mythical past.
Yeah, and I said, "Oh, is that a Jesus prayer or prayer?" I don't think I called it a prayer rope. I think I said, "Oh, is that for the Jesus prayer?" And then we
Yeah.
started talking about that. That was at the at your church's summer festival. I brought my
Yeah,
family to.
Mediterranean festival. That's right.
So
And the rest is history, my friend.
yeah, the rest is mythology, my friend.
Yes.
So so
Mytho-historical
other
origin.
examples. So the rosary is like I said, it's a prayer tool. It brings you into closer relationship. Actually, holy water itself is a sacramental,
Mhm.
but then it's of course used in a sacrament in the sacrament of baptism. Chrism oil, again, it's a sacramental in and of itself, but it's used in the sacraments of baptism, confirmation, or chrismation.
Mhm.
Uh,
Right.
actually, as we record this, it's not going to be released until later, but it's Holy Week for us Western Catholics, and
Weester,
yeah.
as we affectionately call it in the East.
So during this week of Holy Week, before it, we have the Chrism Mass, where the bishop will bless all of the chrism oil for the entire diocese, and then the priests will take it back to their respective parishes to be used for the next year for all the baptisms and
Hmm,
and of course the confirmations on Holy Saturday, which is coming up, and for their
sure, sure.
anointings and things like that. So
So, and this is it's interesting to me. It's like you're pointing out, like so the sacramentals are like the almost the mediums for the sacrament. I don't think that's like a proper definition. I don't even think that's what you said,
no,
but like that's kind of like how it plays out in a lot of ways.
because it doesn't
Um,
have to be. Like I said, you don't need a rosary for a sacrament, but it's still a sacramental. The
mhm,
miraculous medal, which we've talked about, wasn't made in like connected with any specific sacrament, but it's just a holy item that draws one into prayer. And so
mhm.
oftentimes these are given as gifts, whether it's a holy card that is just given out, which is made to have a prayer written on the back or a saint's life on the back. That would be another example too. Doing the sign of the
Or how
cross.
about icons?
Yeah,
Icons.
absolutely.
This would be a tremendous. Obviously, in Orthodoxy, icons are a significant portion of our worship, in our buildings and things like that. It's very common for um, almost prescribed, really, for an Orthodox Christian to have a prayer corner,
Mhm.
or either a room or a corner of the house that you create something of a shrine where you will host icons and other sacramentals, right? To use that language, that help you with your prayer life and help you to focus and help you to engage with Christ
Well,
through these
and
things.
actually to tie in, even so I brought up the rosary before you brought up icons. So one of the things about the rosary is that it is a physical tool, right? You hold the chain, you hold the beads in your hand, but it's about helping you enter into a deeper meditation on the life of Jesus, the life of Mary. And that's exactly
Hmm.
what, even though the icon, it's a picture, it's paint on a panel of wood or paint on a canvas or whatever, but you're supposed to enter into it, right? Enter into the story behind it, enter into the symbolism that's on the icon. And that's where the meditation comes in. That's where the prayer comes in. And
Well, and so
that's what makes it a sacramental, as you were saying. But sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so I had my kids had a friend stay the night this last weekend. Saturday night, came with us to church Sunday. Um, and I was kind of whispering to him in the back, like what was going on and what things were and things like that, because he didn't really have any familiarity with like an Orthodox church or the Orthodox church service. I'm not really, I don't think he's much of a churchgoer at all, though he seemed kind of open minded. So it was pleasant. And so I was trying to like foster that a little bit. Um, but it's funny to try to explain things to someone that is coming from zero
For
background
modernity.
with, yeah, from modernity into a liturgical environment with liturgical practices. And, I don't frequently think about what I'm going to, how I'm going to try to explain this
Hmm.
to someone, if I have to, right? Because I typically don't have to. It just doesn't come up, and it's not exactly an evangelism tool, right? We don't evangelize by going out in the world and telling people about sacramentals, right?
Hmm.
But like, nevertheless, there I was trying to explain things, and it's funny how much when you actually try to explain something to somebody in the moment while it's happening, where it's like, this is all this ritual. Because I mean, what do you think about this? Is the ritual itself of the liturgy,
Yeah.
the act of doing things in a regulated manner, in a repetitious manner, using your form, your body to make like a sign of the cross, for example. Does that fall under the umbrella of sacramental in your view, or is that kind of one step lower, maybe? But it's still on the same spectrum, I would say, right? Now this is kind of a little taste of the the jokey hint that I said at the beginning of the show where me and Mike were kind of like having a fun little debate about sacraments and things like that. Which I don't think we're actually very far off on as traditions. But as Mike said, sacraments in the Catholic Church have been kind of specified um, and epitomized in these kind of seven forms. And then in the Eastern Church, it's just less defined. We do define those seven sacraments, but we also have this kind of view where um, there's kind of many types of sacraments, and so it really just kind of becomes a distinction of, well, what do you mean by the
It almost
word
sometimes feels like it's more
sacrament?
of a quantitative difference in terms of as opposed to the qualitative, which it almost feels weird saying because it's like how do you quantify the grace present within a sacrament? I mean, even in the Catholic
Right.
tradition, we do say that the Blessed Sacrament is the most important or the sacrament of sacraments because it's Christ himself, not just the power of Christ or the grace of God or whatever. Um, but there again, it's like there's no like meter that determines how much grace is in one or the other. And so you
Sure.
almost think like,
Yep. Yep.
okay, well, objectively or subjectively, was there more grace in this sacramental, this item that brought me into a closer relationship with God than there was objectively in this, sacrament, quote unquote, one of these seven, even if I didn't respond to it, so to speak. And this is
Hmm.
where we get into, I mean, this is almost taking us a little too far afield, but that kind of goes to what you were saying of the Catholic tradition would not say that what the Eastern Church recognizes as those same seven are like less so, right? So we agree on like what those seven are, but then it's more
Yep.
like, yeah, quantity wise, right? You maybe attribute more to where the Catholic
Yeah.
Church
Well,
is like,
there's
well, we have this cutoff for these seven, so to speak. And I know it's a bigger
part of the thing
conversation than
is,
this, but yeah.
yeah. No, part of the thing is that there's actually just not some kind of definitive
Um,
in the East. There's not necessarily a definitive answer at all,
yeah.
right? So I think that you'll
I'm
actually get
shocked.
different perspectives. Yeah.
I'm
What?
sh-
Um,
Look at me. I'm floored over here.
y-
And this is
you
yeah,
are. Pick up your jaw,
consistent with
Mike.
all
Come
of our
on, we're trying to do a
conversations.
podcast.
Yeah.
But there's actually probably lots of different opinions about this in the Eastern Church. Just full stop, right? The opinion that informed me the most, right, as I was coming from my Protestant background into a classical Christian background, was Father Alexander Schmemann, who is a famous writer from the Orthodox tradition. He wrote a book in the 60s and 70s called For the Life of the World. And it was one of these books that I read really early on as I was trying to figure out what orthodoxy was. And I had a hard time understanding this book. And it's not a book designed to be hard to understood. It was just so different from what I was used to.
Mhm.
It was one of my first real exposures to the sacramental worldview
Yeah.
as such. And to my mind, I it took me a while to like wrap my head around it, but it left me tantalized, and I was like, there's something here that I've never heard of or I've never understood, and I really want to understand what this is because it just spoke,
Well,
it touched
it's
something
again, it's a
in my
walk
heart.
through the wardrobe where there's a much bigger world on the inside than you ever saw on the outside. And that's really
Nice
what
TARDIS reference.
Oh, yeah, that too. I said
Mm-hmm.
wardrobe, but, and really
Mm-hmm.
that's what these sacramentals are meant to be, is they're supposed to be sort of the doorways or the pathways into that bigger spiritual world. And so first you have to, whether in terms of what you see first, whether you see the bigger spiritual world and then the sacramentals, or you're exposed to the sacramentals first and they help you enter in more, right? Chicken or egg sort of thing. It's like whatever happens first, that's the relationship between them. right? The rosary isn't effective just as a collection of, a chain and beads. It's how is it used to enter you into more deeply meditate and contemplate the life of Jesus. And same thing with the prayer rope, or same thing with like holy water. And I was actually just telling my students this too, where it's like if you break down the substance of it, like if you did a break, it's still H2O, and yet.
Well, no, exactly. Like the and here's something that Father Schmemann says a lot. He basically, one of his recurring themes is that sacraments and sacramentals are revealing what's already there. That it is a transfiguration, more a transfiguration than a transformation, right? Now, I actually don't know how much this is um, not in agreement with, systematic Catholic theology. So, and I'm not really trying to open up a debate. I'm trying to say something that I think would be universal to both our traditions, um, and that is that the world has been given to us to commune with God, and the idea that stuff is here, but it's kind of meaningless
Mhm,
until we whatever, give it meaning or something like that is not really the best way to look at things. That God is always trying to meet us through his created world, but he has defined specific ways for us as a community to come meet him and experience him in ways that we can enact and that we can participate in at a universal level, at a Catholic level. And that this means of grace, this means of meeting God, right, and receiving strength from God, he defines these for us, right? So it's not the same thing as saying, "Oh, I can go out into the woods and meet God there, and that's fine, because God's everywhere and all of created reality is there for us," kind of thing.
mhm.
You can technically, as far as I'm concerned, I think that God is everywhere and that He uses all manner of things to meet you, but He has distinctly defined some things to meet us through. And then it sounds like within the Catholic system, there's an understanding that sacramentals can be myriad, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, all right, so like you have like the seven main sacraments of sure, of course, but is there a number of sacramentals,
No, that's
or
the
is that
thing
much
is,
more of just like a
well,
category
because even
for?
using the example of the rosary, like the rosary didn't pop up at the same point as the gospels. Like that was a developed thing over the course of church history. And so you would have
Hmm.
added a sacramental to that. Or even just like you
Yep.
said, even icons themselves, even if you want to say that St. Luke wrote the first icon, that still would
Hmm.
have been sort of like post gospel like tradition. And so it was
Yep.
something that would have been added to. And of course, yeah, the number of icons that could be made is infinite because there's always different, whether it's new saints joining the church or new perspectives on the same biblical story, right? They can still write new icons from the Old Testament and New Testament. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, it's the
Well,
idea of
like
sacramentals is.
any method, yeah, any method, any means by which you bring to remembrance God in your life, or commune with God in your heart, is basically a sacramental, right? And I think that's where our traditions are basically in agreement, right? Like there's actually, um I guess Orthodox are like everything's a sacramental and the sacraments are on that spectrum, but they're categorically specific because they're kind of God defining, God given type thing. And Catholics would kind of say the same thing.
Mm.
But they would, I don't know, maybe there's like a slightly bigger division between sacramental and sacrament in the Catholic tradition.
Well, yeah, I
But
mean, I
at the
guess
same
I would
time,
say
it's
that
it's kind
like
of
if you wanna point out where maybe the main distinction would be, is that the sacraments, work in and of themselves, whereas like the sacramental is something that still is ordering you to the sacraments, right? Or ordering you to
mhm,
the prayer. Whereas, yeah, like the sacraments are working in and of their own. Like that's Christ working primarily. Whereas, you know,
yeah.
yeah, and again, if you wanna say, "Oh, the Holy Spirit is working on my heart when I pick up that rosary," or whatever, that's fine. I don't, that's not the important thing. Um, but the rosary is not a replacement for, any of the 7 sacraments in
No.
terms of the grace that is received, right?
Right,
Even
yeah,
though I may
definitely
cooperate
not a walk
better.
in the woods,
Yeah.
right? You
Well,
know,
yeah, or that
like,
as an example too.
yeah,
Like a tree is a sacramental
exactly.
to the degree that it can bring you into closer relationship with God, I guess, but it's,
Uh-huh.
it's not a replacement
Yeah,
for
right.
baptism or whatever.
No, and even I would say
Yeah.
that, right? But, the but the idea is still that the world is full of the means of knowing God, and that it's all there for our salvation. Like, the world itself
Yeah.
was created for our salvation. And so that's why everything is kind of in continuity with each other. That doesn't mean there's not divisions. That doesn't mean there's not categorizations, if you will. It's kind of a matter of emphasis from my perspective. Like, are you emphasizing the categorization or are you emphasizing the continuity, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's just kind of from my perspective, though.
Well, and no, and I
Uh,
think that'd even be like even to go back to the thing I was saying before where it's like what's the dividing line between these 7 and all the other things that lead to the 7? I mean, is it more of a spectrum or whatever? I don't know if those questions have even really been because like you said, how do you quantify it in the first place? How do you quantify, oh, I got 5 grace points compared to 7? Well, I mean, how do you even
well,
that's
I don't know, Mike. You're
yeah.
the Catholic.
Yeah,
Isn't that what you
exactly.
guys do?
So that's just where
Can I buy some indulgences?
I mean, how much you got? What do you got on you? Uh, so, and it's what's funny is we haven't even talked about. So the title of this episode is actually not from any of the examples we've mentioned. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. Do you know it's from Zelda.
Uh,
Yeah,
oh yeah, no, I was totally
and
gonna bring up Zelda
and
too.
we actually
Hook shot,
because I
hook
mean,
shot. Best tool in Zelda is the hook shot
so
because the world just opens up when you get that baby.
so
It's sick.
I mean, because really, I wonder if like video games are probably even a better example of this, but where you
Video games are when I was trying to think about this earlier, and I wasn't afraid to bring up video games. It just didn't happen in conversation. But I kept coming up with video game examples.
oh okay
Half of them from Zelda,
yeah
because Zelda's all about basically just like accruing
well or
sacramentals, if
Mario,
you
right?
will.
Because Mario is like you get the fire
Mario,
power,
Fire
or you get
Flower,
the
that would
squirrel,
be
or you get
sick.
the.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know if you've seen. My kids played the Mario Odyssey, where you can be the cat. So if
Uh
you've
huh.
seen the cat one too, but
I have seen the cat
I know
one.
I remember the
Or
squirrel.
Metroid Prime. The Metroid series is one of my favorite video game series ever. And every single one of those, you lose all your equipment at the beginning of the game, and then you have to like reacquire all your equipment as you go.
Okay,
There's probably a Pilgrim's Progress slash Divine Comedy
or at least a hero's journey.
analogy in there somewhere.
I mean,
Yeah,
especially with the Mario.
Hero's Journey
Like
would
I
be
thought of it
that's an
with
interesting
Mario
point.
for sure, but
We'll do a Metroid episode. But
you're gonna have to take over on that one. I never played that game, so
oh dude, Metroid Prime was just remastered. We'll come over, have you over for the weekend, and just like play through Metroid Prime because that's one of the best
I
games ever.
can assure you that will not happen. I can
What,
promise
your
you.
wife's not gonna let you do that?
Yeah.
Tell her it's for the show,
Yeah.
Mike.
All right.
Get your corporate overlords to like, lean on
Yeah.
her a bit,
To
mafia style.
to finance that, is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking more physical violence,
Oh,
but sure, money
much
works
better.
too.
Yeah. So this all kind of flows into, and this is why, like we said at the beginning of the show, you're saying how, oh, is this going to be like the magic episode? Well, both the magic episode and the sacramentals, they both correspond to this incarnational view of reality. And it kind of goes back to what you said of the entire world is a lowercase s sacrament. The entire world is a visible sign for the invisible love of God, which, if you want to do the most bare bones, basic definition of a sacrament, you can, like, it's something visible that shows the invisible grace or invisible love of God. And yeah, this is where you'll even see this language in the church documents, where the church is a sacrament to the degree that it makes visible, right? It's the body of Christ extended through time. And again, calling the church the body of Christ, that's not something the Catholic Church made up. That's right from St. Paul. And
Right.
saying how,
And it's also not some kind of like arbitrary metaphor.
no, yeah.
It really means it.
And
We really mean that.
just like we were saying, the holy water is meant to be united to baptism, or the chrism is meant to be united to sacrament A, B, or C. Well, the church is meant to be united to the head, to Jesus. And so there has to be that unity there between them. But that's where this incarnational view of reality works, because the symbol doesn't just represent something because I said so. The symbol represents something, and I'm recognizing that the symbol represents something. And that's the
Let me
that's the
share.
relationship.
I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to just like read stuff on podcast,
But
but this
you
whole
break all
thing,
the
I got
rules,
kind of,
Jacob.
but I'm going
You
to.
break
I'm a
all the
rule breaker,
rules.
man.
Yeah.
I'm an outlaw. Just call me Robin Hood. But it got me thinking about For the Life of the World. So I went and I found this book I haven't read this in like 10 years. But I was just, thumbing through pages and came across this term that felt, or this little couple sentences that I thought were super appropriate for this episode. He says, thus, the term sacramental. Now, he's actually not it's ironic that he uses the word sacramental because he's not talking about sacramental in the way that we're talking about it. He's just using it as a adjective. But it, adjective, noun, it's what's the difference, right? But there is actually a difference according to my
Yeah, I was gonna
English
say, I
teacher
don't
in
know
high
if I'm
school.
quite ready for that yet. You just like jumped off the plank big time, but I'm just gonna let you just keep tying the noose, and I'll just sit here and watch.
All right. Thus, the term sacramental means that for the world to be a means of worship and a means of grace is not accidental, but the revelation of its meaning, the restoration of its essence, the fulfillment of its destiny. It is the natural sacramentality of the world that finds expression in worship and makes the latter the foundation and spring of man's life and activity. So it's this idea again. This is like a huge theme in Father Schmeman's work. Is that what the world is, and this is the better way of putting it. It's a ready means of sacrament, right? So if the world itself is not sacrament, because those are kind of a specific thing, right, that are defined by God within His Church, but the material reality of the world is preconditioned, revealed to be a ready means
Mhm.
of sacramentality. And its proper purpose for us and for our lives. And so that does mean everything we encounter is meant to be a means of communing with God and has been prepared for us so that we can use it
And there is
as
a
a
natural
means of
element to
communing with
this. And I
God.
think actually a good example that ties into this. So we've been talking about Lewis this episode, but also in our rings episode, because remember how we take for granted when the wardrobe pops up and that it magically brings the kid. But what we learn in The Magician's Nephew is that wardrobe was from the tree that grew where the magic rings from The Magician's Nephew were buried, or from the, I think, yeah,
Mhm.
from the, and so there's a natural relationship to the wood that's used in the wardrobe as again, taking you into the spiritual reality.
Mhm.
I'm sure this is always something that we could definitely always come back to or keep coming back to.
Well, and I don't know if we exhausted my idea for what a magic episode is going to look like. So we'll end up because when we do the magic episode, we're going to talk about sacraments again for sure because that's kind of what I want it to be. A kind of juxtaposition, well, just an exploration in general, right? But so I'm sure we'll come back to this topic, and it's such an important topic for the Christian, for the classical Christian to better understand, and better enter into, and then for those who don't belong to a sacramental communion, hopefully just a means of better understanding what classical Christianity has to say about this. But it's such an important part of our lives, and we need to talk about it more and better understand it.
Yeah. No, and actually I want to make it was the where the apple that was given to Diggory in Magician's Nephew. I meant to say, but no, that's the
Ah,
so that was
yes.
a quick correction on my part. That's the tree that grew from that. That's the wood that's used in the wardrobe. But no, absolutely. It's supposed to make your Christianity bigger. It's supposed to make it's not a reduction, right? Which is what we've sort of and
Absolutely.
so
Yeah, when I discovered all of these things, right, as I read about it and came to understand it a little bit better, I never lost anything. And I've heard other
no,
people say this same sentiment before, other converts
yeah,
and things like that. I didn't lose anything from what I believed as a Protestant. But I've gained a lot. as I've continued to be taught by
Yeah,
classical
and just
Christian
like
churches.
Christianity itself was not a rejection of its Jewish roots from its, Israelite roots, but a fulfillment of it, which is what I mean, that's what Jesus and the apostles were first like that's what the apostles were recognizing in Jesus, that he's the Messiah that they've long been awaiting. It made their Judaism bigger. It made their Israelite faith bigger. And so it's the same
Yep.
thing if you're coming from whether it's a secular background or a non-practicing Catholic background or a Protestant background or whatever, is in this incarnational view of Christianity and of reality, because that's what it does, is it affects your view of reality. Then it makes it all bigger. It's much deeper and bigger. You go, again, to
Mhm.
use another Lewis, you go further up and further in the more that
Yep.
you get into it, which I know everybody uses further up and further in, but it just is very
Yeah,
fitting
you're
and
so
it felt
lame.
natural. So
It
yeah,
did.
yeah, no, I
Uh, that's why this episode was a great, kind of, like, episode to jump into after our Avatar episode. Um, is this gonna air after our Avatar
yeah,
episode? I'm not even sure
that's a
because
good,
sometimes
we
these
might have
air
to
out of
retcon
order.
that. No, that's fine.
Yeah.
No, it's
Well, anyway, if you haven't listened to our Avatar episode yet, hopefully you have, because some of the themes in that, correspond with some of the themes we talked about
it
today,
all
but
converges onto one point, doesn't it? So either way,
we're
no,
all just
whenever
saying the
it
same
happens,
thing
it
over and over
happens.
again anyway.
No, thank you very much,
Yep.
Jacob, for coming in and like I said, enjoying this conversation and how it relates to what again from Voyage Comics from Metal Knight, right? And
Metal
how it's
Knight,
all about the
your
sacramental
new
and
favorite comic.
yeah. So, um, but thank you guys for coming to listen. And just a reminder, want to ask you guys to like, subscribe, give a 5-star rating, leave a positive review for the show so that we can keep trying to convince Jacob to convert to Catholicism through all these different sacramentals. And
You're doing a bang up job,
aren't we?
let me
Yeah.
tell you.
All right. Sounds good. We'll have it.
Good luck.
Yeah. Thanks,
God bless.
everyone.
Thanks, Catholics. You papists.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.